Tonight, we invite you to close your eyes, to settle into your space of rest, and to let the noise of the modern world fade into a gentle hum. Allow the weight of your day to release. Feel the gentle pull of stillness as we prepare to journey back in time. There is no need to focus intently, no need to memorize dates or names. Simply allow my voice to be a guide, a soft current in the river of time, carrying you gently along. If you drift away, that is perfectly fine. This is a journey for your mind to wander, to explore, and ultimately to find rest. Tonight, our journey takes us to a place of deep human experience, a concern that has echoed through the millennia. We will explore the ancient world as it confronted one of its greatest and most mysterious challenges, the invisible threat of widespread illness, what our ancestors would come to know as plague. We will not dwell on the sharp edges of panic or the clamor of fear. Instead, we will observe the quiet, unfolding reality of their world. We will imagine the subtle shifts in the rhythm of daily life, the dawning awareness that something was amiss, and the myriad ways in which they sought to understand and endure. So, find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow, and let us begin our journey. Let us travel back to a time when the world was both larger and smaller, a time of whispers, of uncertainty, and of profound human resilience. Let us listen for the first whispers of illness. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like, or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, if you will, a small settlement nestled in the Fertile Crescent, cradled by the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The air is warm and dry, carrying the faint sweet scent of date palms and the dusty aroma of sun-baked earth. The year is irrelevant. The exact location, a place lost to time. What matters is the rhythm, the steady, predictable pulse of life. The sun, a brilliant, unwavering orb in a sapphire sky, dictates this rhythm. Its rising is heralded by the distant crowing of a rooster, a sound that threads its way through the narrow, winding alleys of the village. It is a signal for the stirring of life. Inside homes of mud brick, cool and dark against the coming heat, families begin to move. The soft rustle of woolen blankets, the quiet murmur of voices speaking a language long since silent, the clink of clay pottery as a woman prepares the morning's gruel, a simple porridge of barley or emmer wheat. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years of age, is tasked with fetching water. He picks up a heavy clay jug, its surface cool and smooth beneath his small hands. He steps out from the darkness of his home into the brightening lane. The air is still cool, a temporary reprieve. He walks barefoot, the packed earth of the alley familiar beneath his soles. He passes other homes, their wooden doors still shut. From behind one, he hears the soft, rhythmic grinding of a stone quern as a neighbor mills grain for the day's bread. It is a sound as constant and comforting as the rising sun itself. He reaches the central well, the heart of the community. A small group of women are already there. Their voices a low, pleasant murmur as they draw water. Their conversation a gentle tapestry of village life. The price of wool in the market, a neighbor's pending marriage, the health of a newborn lamb. Our young boy waits his turn, his gaze wandering over the familiar scene. The well, lined with stones worn smooth by countless hands and ropes, is a place of gathering, a source of life. He lowers the bucket, hears the satisfying splash as it hits the cool, dark water far below, and begins the slow, arduous task of hauling it back up. The water he collects is cool and precious, carrying with it the taste of the very earth that sustains them. This is the way of things, a rhythm unbroken for generations. In another part of the ancient world, perhaps in a bustling port city on the coast of the Levant, the morning rhythm is different, but a rhythm nonetheless. Here, the air is thick with the scent of salt and sea, mingled with the aromas of cedarwood from Lebanon, spices from the east, and the pungent smell of fish being laid out to dry in the sun. The sun's first rays catch the sails of trading ships bobbing gently in the harbour, their masts like a sparse, leafless forest. A merchant, a man of some standing, wakes not to a rooster's crow, but to the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer and the shouts of sailors securing their vessels. His home is larger, built of cut stone, with an open central courtyard where a small fountain whispers, a sound of contained luxury. He dresses in linen, finer and lighter than the villagers' wool. His morning meal is more varied, perhaps figs, dates, and a piece of soft cheese, accompanied by bread made from finely sifted flour. He walks to his warehouse near the docks, his sandals clicking on the paved stones of the main thoroughfare. The city is a cacophony of controlled chaos. Carts laden with amphorae of wine and oil rumble past, their wooden wheels groaning. Donkeys, burdened with sacks of grain, are prodded along by their owners. The air hums with a dozen different dialects as traders from Egypt, from the Aegean Islands, from the deep interior haggle and greet one another. The merchant's life is governed not just by the sun, but by the tides, by the arrival of ships, by the complex web of commerce that connects his city to a wider, unseen world. He feels the pulse of this world in the coins that pass through his hands, in the foreign goods that fill his storerooms, in the news and rumors that arrive with every new sail on the horizon. His world is stable, prosperous, predictable in its own bustling way. These rhythms, whether of a small, self-contained village or a sprawling, connected city, are the bedrock of existence. They are built on the assumption of continuity. The sun will rise, the seasons will turn, the rains will come, the harvest will be gathered. Life, with its hardships and its small joys, will proceed along a known path. It is this very predictability that makes the first whisper of illness so profoundly unsettling. It does not arrive with a sudden crash. There is no grand announcement. It begins as a series of small, discordant notes in the familiar symphony of daily life. Back in our Mesopotamian village, the first sign might be a simple observation, shared between two women at the well. One mentions that her husband, a man known for his strength and tireless work in the fields, did not rise for the morning's ploughing. He complained of a fire in his head and a weakness in his limbs. The other woman nods, her expression clouded. Her own eldest daughter, she confides, has been lying on her pallet for a day, refusing food, her skin strangely hot to the touch. It is a brief exchange, a moment of shared concern, but they part with a subtle weight of anxiety. Fevers are common, of course, a passing affliction. Yet, there is something in the shared timing that feels unusual. A few days pass. The sun continues its daily journey across the sky. The grinding of the quernstone, the bleating of sheep, the call to the fields, these sounds continue, but the discordant notes multiply. The strong farmer is now delirious, his wife's name a garbled sound on his parched lips. The young girl has developed angry, weeping sores on her arms and neck. Now another neighbor's child is sick, and then another. The conversations at the well grow longer, more hushed. The usual gossip is replaced by a fearful accounting of the afflicted. Who has fallen ill? What are their symptoms? The fire in the head, the weakness, the spots that bloom on the skin. A pattern begins to emerge, a frightening mosaic of suffering pieced together through whispered exchanges over garden walls and in the shared space of the well. The village elder, a man whose face is a map of seasons and sorrows, sits at the entrance to his home, his gaze distant. He has seen fevers, he has seen pox. He has seen the familiar illnesses that claim the very young and the very old. But this feels different, the speed, the way it strikes down the strong as easily as the weak. It is a shadow falling over the community, a presence that has no name. He watches as the rhythm of the village begins to falter. There are fewer men in the fields. The laughter of children, usually a constant echo in the alleyways, is muted. There is a new sound, the low, keening wail of mourning, from a home where the shadow has completed its work. The first reaction is not panic, but a deep, gnawing uncertainty. The world, once so predictable, has become treacherous. The very air they breathe feels suspect. A simple touch, once a gesture of comfort, is now fraught with potential danger. They look to the familiar for answers. They look to the elder, to the woman who knows the healing properties of herbs, to the priest who interprets the will of the gods. They are searching for a reason, for a name, for a way to restore the broken rhythm of their lives. In the bustling coastal city, the first whispers are carried on the same currents of commerce that bring its prosperity. A sailor, recently arrived on a ship from a distant port in Egypt, stumbles through the crowded marketplace, his face flushed, his gait unsteady. He collapses near a food stall, his body racked with shivers despite the afternoon heat. People gather around, a circle of curious and concerned faces. They help him to his feet, offering him water. He speaks of a sickness that swept through his crew during their voyage, a swift and brutal illness that claimed 3 of his shipmates, their bodies summarily shrouded and committed to the deep. The port officials are called. They are practical men, accustomed to dealing with the troubles that sailors bring: drunken brawls, petty theft, exotic diseases. They have seen shipboard fevers before. They isolate the sick sailor in a small windowless room in a hospice near the docks, a place reserved for the indigent and the foreign. They post a guard. It is a measure of control, of containment. The merchant we met earlier hears of the incident. He makes a note to avoid the dock where the Egyptian ship is moored. He tells his workers to be cautious. It is a disruption, an anomaly, but the city's powerful pulse seems, for the moment, to beat on. But the sailor was not the only one. A dock worker who helped unload the ship's cargo of linen a few days later feels the fire in his own head. He dismisses it as the result of too much cheap wine the night before, but the next day he cannot rise from his mat. His wife finds dark, swollen lumps in his groin and under his arms, tender and hard as stones. He cries out in agony when she touches them. She has never seen such a thing. She sends her son to fetch a healer, a man who lives in the artisans' quarter and deals in poultices and incantations. The healer arrives, a stooped figure carrying a leather bag filled with dried herbs, amulets of carved bone, and small clay pots of ointments. He examines the dock worker, his face grim. He has seen the swellings of infected wounds, the lumps of other diseases. But these are different. Their size, their color, a terrifying shade of purple-black, and the speed with which they have appeared. He applies a poultice of ground lentils and honey, murmuring a charm to drive out the demon of sickness. He has a feeling of deep foreboding. Soon, the whispers become a rising murmur throughout the city. The dockworker's wife falls ill, then their neighbors. The sickness seems to creep outward from the harbor, a stain spreading through the city's vibrant tapestry. It follows the paths of trade and daily interaction. A prostitute who entertained a sailor from the blighted ship, a baker who sold bread to the dock worker, a moneylender who collected a debt from the baker. The connections are invisible, untraceable at first, but the results are terrifyingly visible. The city's rhythm begins to change. The marketplace, once a chaotic symphony of commerce, grows quieter. Stalls are left untended. People hurry through the open squares, their faces covered with a fold of their cloaks, their eyes avoiding contact. The sounds of industry, the blacksmith's hammer, the weaver's shuttle, the carpenter's saw, become intermittent, faltering. The normal smells of the city are now overlaid with something else. The cloying sweetness of funeral pyres that burn day and night on the outskirts, a constant smoky reminder of the mounting toll. The first official recognition comes from the city's council of elders, who meet in a stone chamber near the main temple. They are wealthy merchants, powerful landowners, high priests. Their world of order and influence is being threatened by an enemy they cannot see and do not understand. They listen to the reports from the port officials, from the captains of the city guard, from the priests who tend the temples. The number of dead is no longer a handful, but dozens and then scores every day. The usual burial grounds are overwhelmed. The systems of daily life are breaking down. Their initial reaction is to impose order. They command the city guard to enforce a quarantine around the dockside neighborhoods, creating a zone of sickness. But it is too late. The contagion has already slipped through the invisible net of social connections and is loose in the wider city. They order the streets to be cleansed with water and vinegar, a desperate attempt to wash away the miasma they believe is causing the disease. They issue proclamations, read by heralds in the deserted public squares, urging citizens to remain in their homes, to avoid gatherings. But these measures are born of a profound ignorance about the true nature of the threat. They see the sickness as a punishment from the gods, or as a foul vapor, a bad air rising from the swamps or carried on the wind. They do not understand the role of the flea, the rat, the simple touch, a mother tending her sick child, a priest offering last rites, a friend sharing a cup of water. These acts of compassion become conduits for death. The dawning of this terrible understanding is perhaps the most frightening aspect of the initial phase of a plague. It is the realization that the very foundations of their society, community, commerce, faith, family, have become the instruments of its potential destruction. In the village, the shared well, the center of their communal life, becomes a place of fear. Is the water tainted? Is the person drawing water next to you carrying the sickness? In the city, The bustling marketplace, the engine of its prosperity, is now a place of contagion. Every coin, every piece of fruit, every bolt of cloth could be a carrier of the invisible poison. This is the first stage, the erosion of certainty, the slow, creeping realization that the world is no longer operating according to the rules they have always known. The sun still rises, but it shines down on a world steeped in fear and confusion. The rhythms of life, once a source of comfort and predictability, are broken, replaced by a new and terrifying cadence. The relentless, accelerating drumbeat of the plague. The whispers of illness have grown into a collective cry of a community grappling with a force beyond its comprehension, a crisis that will test the limits of its knowledge, its faith, and its very ability to endure. The time for whispers is over. The time of reaction has begun. In the face of a crisis that defies all known remedies, a crisis that dissolves the predictable rhythms of life into chaos and fear, humanity has always turned its gaze upward. When the world of the senses offers no explanation, no comfort, we instinctively search for meaning in the world of the unseen. For the people of the ancient world, this was not a matter of last resort. It was the most logical, the most immediate, and the most essential response. The universe to them was not a collection of impersonal forces, but a living, breathing entity, governed by a pantheon of powerful and often temperamental deities. The sun did not rise because of planetary mechanics. It was carried across the sky by a god in a flaming chariot. The rains did not fall because of atmospheric pressure. They were a gift, or a withholding from a sky deity. And so, a pestilence that swept through a community, a sickness that defied the herbalist's remedies and the healer's charms, could not be a random occurrence. It could not be merely natural. It had to be a message, an action. It had to be the work of the gods. And so the desperate question, whispered in the quiet of a mud-brick home and chanted in the cavernous halls of great stone temples, was not, "What is this sickness?" but rather, "Who is angry? And what have we done to offend them?" Imagine yourself in that Mesopotamian village, now silenced by grief. The shared well is a place of suspicion. The fields are tended by too few hands. The initial confusion has now solidified into a dreadful certainty. The divine order has been broken. An elder of the community, his face etched with the gravity of his responsibility, gathers the remaining heads of households. They meet not in an open square, but in the small, dimly lit chamber of the village shrine, a space dedicated to the patron god of their settlement. The air inside is close, thick with the scent of old lamp oil and the faint, dusty smell of clay offerings left on a small altar. A single flame flickers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The elder speaks, his voice low and raspy. He does not speak of bad air or contagion. He speaks of transgression. Did someone neglect the proper offerings? Was a sacred taboo violated? Did a traveler bring with them the curse of a foreign god? They are searching their collective memory, sifting through the events of the past weeks and months, looking for the misstep, the moment of disrespect that could have brought this upon them. Someone might recall a poor harvest last season and wonder if the offerings of grain were sufficient. Another might mention a boundary stone that was moved in a dispute between neighbors, an act that could have disturbed the spirits of the land. These were not mere superstitions. They were the principles that governed their relationship with a cosmos they perceived as intensely personal and reactive. Every law, every custom, every ritual was part of a delicate pact between mortals and the divine. To them, the plague was a clear and terrifying sign that their side of the bargain had not been kept. The solution, therefore, was spiritual. It was to mend this broken pact. The community would gather what little they had left: a healthy lamb, the best of their stored grain, a measure of precious beer, and present it to the altar. The elder, acting as the community's priest, would perform the ritual of offering, his voice a low chant, reciting the formula of appeasement that had been passed down through generations. It was an apology, a plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to restore balance, to show the offended God that they were still faithful, that they acknowledged their error, and that they begged for the lifting of the divine punishment. They would watch the smoke from the offering rise towards the heavens, praying it would carry their contrition to the divine realm, and that the shadow over their village might finally recede. Now let us transport ourselves to the grander stage of a major civilization, to the kingdom of the Hittites in Anatolia, a land of mountains and fortified cities. Here, the relationship with the divine was a matter of statecraft. The king was not just a ruler. He was the high priest, the chief intermediary between his people and the pantheon of 1,000 gods they worshipped. The health of the kingdom was a direct reflection of the king's piety and the god's favor. When a plague began to sweep through the Hittite heartland, as we know it did during the 14th century BCE, decimating the army and crippling the empire, the response was immediate, organized, and deeply religious. We know of this response not through conjecture, but through the remarkable discovery of their clay tablets, the state archives of a long-dead empire. On these tablets, inscribed in the intricate wedge-shaped script of cuneiform, are the very prayers of the king. Imagine a scribe in the capital city of Hattusa, his stylus pressing into a tablet of soft, damp clay. He is taking dictation from a priest, or perhaps from the king himself. The words he inscribes are not a clinical assessment of a public health crisis, but a legal and spiritual deposition addressed to the gods. These are the famous plague prayers, and they reveal a sophisticated and almost juridical approach to divine anger. The king, perhaps a ruler like Mursili II, would begin his prayer by acknowledging the gods' power and the reality of their wrath. He would list the devastating effects of the plague, the soldiers dying, the farmland untended, the kingdom weakened. He would then state, with the precision of a lawyer, that the cause of their anger is unknown to him. He would initiate a divine investigation. Priests would be dispatched to consult oracles. They might examine the liver of a sacrificed sheep, believing its lobes, markings, and fissures to be a divine map, a text written by the god that could be read by a trained diviner. They might observe the flight of birds, seeing in their patterns a message from the heavens. Or they might consult a seer, an individual who could enter a trance and supposedly speak with the voice of a god. The questions were specific. Which god is angry? Which ritual was neglected? Which sin was committed? The Hittite archives tell us that these investigations often pointed to past transgressions. Perhaps a treaty with a neighboring kingdom, sworn in the names of the gods, had been broken. Perhaps a previous king had desecrated a temple in a foreign land during a military campaign and brought a cursed idol back to Hattusa. The plague was often seen as a long-delayed punishment, a divine grievance left to fester for years, or even generations. Once the oracle revealed the cause, the path to redemption was clear, if arduous. The king had to confess the sin publicly and formally. He had to admit the fault of his predecessors or his people. This was not a moment of personal shame, but of royal duty. He would then perform elaborate rituals of purification and appeasement. These were not simple offerings, but complex multi-day ceremonies known as the Mugawar. These rituals might involve offering vast quantities of livestock, precious metals, and fine cloth. They could also involve a fascinating practice of substitution. A ram, for instance, would be designated as a carrier of the plague. Priests would perform rites over the animal, symbolically transferring the sickness, the pollution, the sin of the people, onto the ram. The animal would then be driven out, sent away into the wilderness, or towards the enemy's lands, carrying the plague with it. This was not just a symbolic gesture. In their worldview, it was a literal cleansing of the land, a tangible removal of the divine curse. The king, through these meticulous rituals, was not just praying for relief. He was actively, methodically, and legally attempting to settle a divine lawsuit. Let us now travel south to the timeless land of Egypt, the gift of the Nile. Here, life and religion were inextricably linked. The pantheon of gods and goddesses governed every aspect of existence, and the concept of ma'at, of order, justice, and cosmic balance, was paramount. A plague was a terrifying disruption of ma'at, a sign that the world was slipping into chaos. Imagine the great temple complex at Karnak, a city of gods on earth. Its towering pylons, massive columns, and shadowy sanctuaries were designed to impress upon mortals the awesome power of the divine. When pestilence struck Egypt, the focus of fear and supplication often turned to one particular deity, Sekhmet. She was a goddess of immense power and duality. Depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness, crowned with the fiery disk of the sun, she was both a guardian and a destroyer. She was the goddess of healing and medicine, the protector of physicians, who were often her priests. But she was also the goddess of plague, war, and vengeance. She was the mistress of dread, the lady of slaughter. An Egyptian myth tells of how the great sun god Ra, angry at humanity's rebellion, sent his daughter Sekhmet to punish them. She unleashed her fury in a torrent of blood and fire, reveling in the destruction, her thirst for blood unquenchable. She was only stopped when the gods tricked her into drinking vast quantities of beer that had been dyed red to look like blood. Drunk and pacified, she transformed into the gentle, benevolent goddess Hathor. This myth was a living reality for the Egyptians. A plague was seen as Sekhmet unleashed, her lioness form stalking the land, her hot breath spreading disease and death. The response was to pacify her, to soothe her rage, to transform her from the bringer of pestilence back into the benevolent healer. The temples dedicated to her would have seen a flurry of activity. Priests, clad in leopard skins and pure white linen, would have performed an endless cycle of rituals. The air would be thick with the smoke of incense, not just of myrrh and frankincense, but of a special compound known as kyphi, a complex blend of 16 ingredients believed to have calming properties. Hymns would be chanted day and night, not just by priests, but by the populace. These were not hymns of praise for her destructive power, but litanies of appeasement. They would call her by her gentle names, reminding her of her benevolent aspects, trying to coax the purring cat from the roaring lioness. Statues played a crucial role. We have found hundreds of statues of Sekhmet, particularly from the reign of Amenhotep III, who seems to have presided over a time of great sickness. It is believed that he commissioned a staggering number of these statues, perhaps 2 for every day of the year, to be placed in his mortuary temple and other sacred sites. Imagine these rows upon rows of black granite figures, each one a seated Sekhmet, identical and imposing. The daily rituals performed before these statues were a national effort to contain a divine threat. Each statue was a vessel for the goddess's spirit, a point of contact through which she could be soothed. Offerings of food, beer, and flowers would be laid at her feet, not to bribe her, but to show devotion and remind her of the beauty and order of the world she was destroying. For the common person, who could not enter the inner sanctums of the great temples, religious response was more personal, but no less vital. They would rely on amulets. The ankh, the symbol of life, would be worn with renewed fervor. The Eye of Horus, a powerful symbol of protection and healing, would be painted on the doorways of homes. Small, personal shrines would receive extra attention. A family might have a small statue of Bez, the dwarf god, a protector of households, particularly against evil spirits and disease. Or perhaps Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, a guardian of childbirth and family life. They would leave small offerings of food or a dab of perfumed oil, whispering their own private prayers for their loved ones, a microcosm of the grand state rituals taking place in the temples. Across these cultures, a common thread emerges: the belief that illness on a massive scale was a breakdown in communication with the divine. It was a symptom of a spiritual imbalance. The remedies were therefore rooted in restoring that balance. Confession of sin, meticulous and often costly rituals of appeasement, the symbolic transfer of the illness to a scapegoat, the constant repetitive cycle of prayer and offerings. These actions, which may seem strange or irrational to a modern mind, were imbued with a profound logic. They were an attempt to impose order on a world that had descended into terrifying chaos. They provided a framework for understanding suffering, giving it a cause and, crucially, a potential solution. In a world without knowledge of germs or viruses, the anger of the gods was the most rational explanation available. To believe the plague was a divine punishment was, in a way, more comforting than believing it was a random, meaningless event. A punishment implied a crime, and a crime could be atoned for. A random event offered no hope, no course of action, no path back to the familiar, comforting rhythms of the past. The sound of the priest's chant, the smell of the sacred incense, the sight of the communal offering, these were not just appeals to the gods. They were also acts of communal solidarity. In performing these rituals together, the people reaffirmed their shared identity, their collective responsibility, and their mutual dependence in the face of an existential threat. They were a way of managing not just the disease itself, but the crippling fear that it generated. By focusing on the spiritual cause, they found a sense of agency, a set of prescribed actions to perform in a situation that otherwise left them utterly helpless. They were fighting back, not with medicine as we would know it, but with the most powerful tools they possessed: ritual, faith, and the desperate, unwavering hope that their gods were listening. The gods, they believed, must be angry, and so, with all the resources and devotion they could muster, they set about trying to make amends. While the priests chanted their hymns of appeasement and kings sought to settle their accounts with the divine, a different kind of struggle was unfolding on the ground. The gods may dwell in the heavens, but the sickness walked the earth. And for the leaders of cities and villages, for the heads of households, the crisis demanded action in the physical realm. Faith was their shield, but practicality was their spear. Even without an understanding of the microscopic world, a fundamental observation, sharpened by fear, became undeniable. Sickness travelled. It passed from person to person, from house to house, from ship to shore. It was a fire that leaped from one soul to the next, through the simple act of proximity. And so, born from this ancient, intuitive wisdom, came an equally ancient and intuitive response: separation. If the healthy could be kept from the sick, the fire might be contained. It was a simple, brutal, and desperate logic. It was the genesis of a practice we have come to call quarantine, a concept forged not in a laboratory, but in the crucible of recurring pestilence. It was an attempt to draw a line in the sand, to build a wall against an invisible enemy, and in doing so, it would profoundly alter the very fabric of community life. Let us return to the labyrinthine streets of a great Mesopotamian city, perhaps the sprawling metropolis of Babylon. Here, life is lived in close quarters. Homes are packed tightly together, sharing walls. Narrow, unpaved alleys twist and turn, their paths dictated by the organic growth of centuries. The rooftop is a second street, a place where neighbors visit, children play, and families sleep on hot nights. In this densely woven tapestry of human life, separation is a concept that runs contrary to the very nature of existence. Imagine a family in one such home. The father, a weaver, has fallen ill. The telltale fever, the painful swellings. The shadow has fallen across their doorway. The initial reaction is to care for him, to soothe his brow, to offer him water. But as the days pass and his condition worsens, a new cold fear begins to eclipse the instinct for comfort. The weaver's wife sees her young son coughing, his face flushed. She knows, she has seen how this fire spreads. A decision is made, born of desperation. The family will seal itself inside. They will not wait for a decree from the king or the temple. They will act on their own, to protect their neighbors, or perhaps to hide their shame and fear from the outside world. The heavy wooden door to their home is closed. The thick bar, usually only drawn at night against thieves, is dropped into its heavy stone brackets. The sound of it falling into place is a sound of absolute finality. It echoes in the small dark rooms. The world outside is now muted. The familiar shouts of the alley, the laughter of playing children, the call of the street vendor. These sounds are now muffled, distant, belonging to another reality. The light that filters through a small, high window becomes their only clock, tracing the slow, agonizing passage of the day across the dusty floor. The home, once a sanctuary of family life, is transformed into a prison. The air inside becomes thick and stagnant, heavy with the scent of sickness and fear. The rhythm of life inside this sealed house grinds to a halt. There is no weaving, there is no playing, there is only waiting. The mother moves between her ailing husband and her sick child, a phantom in her own home. Her own health becomes a terrifying question mark, a sword hanging over her head. Every cough, every ache, every moment of weariness sends a jolt of terror through her. Food and water, once daily concerns, are now matters of survival. Their stores are meager: a small sack of barley, a few dried fish, a single jar of water. When these run out, what then? There is no one to send to the market, no one to fetch water from the communal cistern. The act of sealing themselves in was an act of severing their lifeline to the community. The neighbors, who once shared gossip over the low wall of the courtyard, now fall silent when they pass the sealed door. They know what it means. They feel a mixture of pity and a profound instinctual fear. They pull their own children closer. They hurry past, their faces averted, perhaps whispering a prayer to the gods to keep the sickness contained within those mud brick walls. The sealed house becomes an island of pestilence in the stream of city life, a place marked by an invisible, but universally understood, sign of danger. This is the most elemental form of quarantine, a self-imposed exile, a family's final desperate act in a world turned upside down. But as the plague tightened its grip, these individual actions were no longer enough. The scale of the disaster demanded a response from the authorities. In the chambers of the city council, or the courts of the king's governors, a new strategy would be debated and implemented. It was a strategy of enforced, organized isolation. Imagine now a decree being issued from the palace. Heralds walk through the parts of the city that are still relatively untouched, their voices ringing out with the new law. Any house in which the sickness appears is to be marked and sealed. It is no longer a choice, it is an order. Let us follow a patrol of the city guard as they perform this grim duty. There are 4 of them, their faces hard, their movements efficient. They are not cruel men, but they are instruments of a terrifying policy. They carry spears, more for authority than for use, and one of them holds a pot of red ochre paste. They are guided by an informant, a neighbor who has reported a case of the sickness in a nearby home, perhaps hoping to protect his own family, or perhaps offered a small reward for the information. They arrive at the house. The door is closed, but the sounds of weeping can be heard from within. The captain of the guard steps forward and pounds his fist on the heavy wood. He shouts the decree. The family inside must remain. They are not to emerge. To do so means punishment, perhaps even death. There is no reply from within, only a sudden, sharp intake of breath. A silence born of pure terror. The guard with the pot of paint steps forward and daubs a large, crude X on the door. The red mark is stark against the pale wood, a visceral symbol of the pestilence within. It is a warning to all who pass. This place is forbidden. This place is death. The guards then post a watch. 2 of them will remain at the end of the narrow alleyway. Their job is not to assist the family, but to ensure they do not escape and spread the contagion further. They are the jailers of the dying. The family inside is now truly trapped. Their fate is sealed, not by a wooden bar they place themselves, but by the full authority of the state. The question of sustenance becomes a matter of official policy, and it is often a brutal one. In some cases, the policy was simple and horrific. The marked house was left to its fate. The authorities provided the seal, and the gods, or starvation, would do the rest. It was a culling, a surgical, if brutal, attempt to excise the sick part of the city to save the whole. In other cases, a slightly more humane, though still grim system might be established. Once a day, a cart would trundle through the quarantined streets. On it would be a meagre ration of water and coarse bread. A worker, his face wrapped in a cloth soaked in vinegar, a primitive and likely useless attempt at protection, would leave a small portion of food on the doorstep of the marked house. He would not knock, he would not speak. He would place the offering on the ground and move on quickly, his own fear a palpable presence. For the family inside, the sound of the approaching cart would be their only connection to the living world, a reminder that they had not been entirely forgotten, but also a stark confirmation of their status as untouchables. Now let us shift our gaze to a place where quarantine was not an ad hoc response, but was woven into the very design of the community. Consider the village of Deir el-Medina in Egypt, on the west bank of the Nile, opposite the great city of Thebes. This was not an ordinary village. It was a purpose-built, highly organized settlement, home to the artisans and craftsmen who carved and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These were the best artists in the land, a vital state asset. Their health and productivity were of paramount importance to the pharaoh. The entire village was enclosed by a high wall with a single guarded gate. It was, in its very essence, a self-contained unit. The workers would leave each day to work on the tombs, but their families, their homes, their entire social world existed within these walls. This design, intended for security and to protect the secrets of the royal tombs, had an unintended secondary function. It made the community incredibly easy to isolate. Archaeological evidence and written records on papyri and ostraca, shards of pottery used for notes and letters, give us a glimpse into life here. When a sickness, perhaps even a plague that had arrived from abroad, began to affect the community, the response could be swift and absolute. The state officials overseeing the necropolis project could simply order the gate to be shut and barred. Imagine being a stonecutter living in this village. One morning, the great wooden gate through which you pass every day does not open. The guards, usually a familiar presence, now stand with their spears crossed. An order has come down from the vizier's office. No one is to leave. No one is to enter. The work on the pharaoh's tomb is suspended. The entire village, a community of hundreds, is now under collective quarantine. The reaction inside the walls would be a mixture of resignation and anxiety. These were people accustomed to state control. Their lives were governed by rations, work schedules, and the orders of scribal overseers. Yet, this is different. The enemy is not a foreign army, but an invisible presence already inside the walls with them. The community must now turn inward. The village council of elders would take on a new importance. They might organize the distribution of stored grain from the village granary. Healers, who were also priests of Sekhmet, would be overwhelmed, moving from house to house, offering what remedies and incantations they could. But the walls that once provided security now create a sense of entrapment. Every neighbor is a potential carrier. The small central courtyard where women would gather to bake bread becomes a place of suspicion. Friendships are strained. The tight-knit community, once a source of strength, now feels suffocating. They can see the cliffs of the Theban necropolis beyond their walls. a symbol of the world of work and normalcy that is now forbidden to them. They are cut off, a state-managed island of disease. The state provided for them, delivering rations to the gate, but it also imprisoned them with their sickness, waiting for the pestilence to burn itself out, however long that might take, however many lives it might cost. The health of the kingdom's most vital artistic project was paramount, and the community of Deir el-Medina was both its most precious asset and, in a time of plague, its most expendable. The concept of quarantine was also applied, perhaps most critically, at the points of entry. The bustling ports and the heavily travelled caravan routes. Leaders in ancient cities understood that these arteries of commerce were also the primary vectors of disease. A ship arriving from a foreign land was a vessel of mystery. It brought valuable goods, but it could also bring a hidden, deadly cargo. Let us return to our coastal city in the Levant. As the plague worsens, the port, once the city's pride and the source of its wealth, becomes its greatest vulnerability. The Council of Elders issues a new series of decrees aimed at controlling maritime traffic. Ships are still allowed to approach the harbour. To turn them away entirely would be to sever the city's economic lifeline. But they are forbidden from docking. They must anchor in the outer bay, a floating village of the suspect. Imagine being a sailor on one of these ships. You have endured a long and arduous journey. You are tired, your supplies are running low, and you are eager for the comforts of shore. But as you approach the familiar harbour, a small boat carrying port officials comes out to meet you. They do not come aboard. They shout their instructions from a safe distance. Your ship must remain at anchor for a prescribed period, 40 days. The number is not yet standardized, but the principle is there. A period of observation, of waiting to see if the sickness will manifest. Your ship becomes a floating prison. The crew, once a team bound by the shared work of sailing, now looks at each other with suspicion. Was the man who coughed this morning the first to fall ill? The food is repetitive, the water tastes stale. The days blend into a monotonous cycle of watching the sun rise and set over a city that is tantalizingly close, yet utterly inaccessible. From your ship you can see the smoke rising from the city, funeral pyres you suspect. You see the diminished traffic in the streets. You are trapped in a state of limbo, waiting for a sentence to be passed, not by a judge, but by the health of your own crewmates. If, after the period of waiting, the ship remains free of disease, it might be allowed to dock, to unload its cargo and conduct its business, though likely under a cloud of suspicion. But if a single sailor falls ill, the ship's fate is sealed. It is declared unclean. No one is allowed to disembark. No supplies are sent out. The ship is ordered to leave, to take its sickness and its dying men back out to the unforgiving sea, or to wait at anchor until the entire crew has perished. This was quarantine in its most unyielding form. It was the city drawing a hard line at its watery frontier. It was a practice born of observation, refined by fear, and executed with the cold logic of self-preservation. It was not based on a scientific understanding of pathogens, but on the empirical knowledge that new sickness often arrived by sea. In sealing their homes, marking their doors, isolating their communities, and holding ships at bay, the people of the ancient world were fighting the plague with the only tools of public health they had. They were imperfect, often cruel, and administered with a profound ignorance of the true enemy. But they were not random acts of panic. They were a rational, if desperate, attempt to create zones of safety, to break the chain of transmission, and to impose a human order on the devastating chaos of a world beset by pestilence. To build a wall, to seal a door, to hold a ship at bay, these are the actions of a community trying to keep sickness out. But the terrifying reality of a plague is that it does not respect walls or doors. It finds its way inside. It takes root within the family, within the body, and when the enemy is no longer at the gates, but in the very room with you, a new front must be opened in the war against pestilence. This was the front line of ancient medicine, a battlefield where the physician, the herbalist, and the magician stood together, their arts inextricably intertwined. When a loved one lay burning with fever, when the dreaded marks appeared upon their skin, the ancient world did not turn to science as we know it. They turned to an arsenal of remedies passed down through generations, a pharmacopoeia blending empirical observation with deep-seated magical belief. It was a world of herbs, of smoke, and of sacred words, each considered as vital as the next in the desperate fight to coax a soul back from the precipice. Imagine, if you will, a physician in pharaonic Egypt. He is likely a priest, a sub-UNW, trained not in a secular university, but in a school attached to a great temple, perhaps one dedicated to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of both plague and healing. His knowledge is recorded on scrolls of papyrus, precious texts like the Ebers papyrus, which we have discovered, a remarkable compilation of remedies and incantations. Let us enter his chamber. It is a quiet, cool room, its thick mud brick walls insulating it from the fierce Egyptian sun. The air is dry and fragrant, filled with the complex aromas of 100 dried plants, stored in labelled clay jars on wooden shelves. There are bundles of dried leaves hanging from the rafters, strings of desiccated berries, and lumps of resin that gleam like dull jewels in the filtered light. This is a place of knowledge, a laboratory of hope. Our physician has been summoned to the home of an official whose daughter has been struck by the sickness. He does not rush. His movements are deliberate, ritualistic. His authority comes not just from his knowledge of plants, but from his connection to the divine. Before he even begins to prepare a remedy, he might recite a prayer, washing his hands in a basin of cool water, purifying himself for the sacred task ahead. He consults his scrolls, his finger tracing the hieratic script. The diagnosis is clear. He identifies the malevolent entity, the WHDW, a principle of corruption that he believes has invaded the girl's body through an opening, poisoning her from within. His task is twofold: to drive this entity out with magic and to treat the physical symptoms with medicine. The two actions are inseparable. He moves to his workbench. He takes a heavy stone mortar and pestle. Into it, he places a handful of willow bark, which he begins to crush with a slow, steady, grinding rhythm. He knows, through generations of observation, that this bark helps to cool the fire of a fever. He does not know of salicin, the active ingredient we now synthesize into aspirin, but he knows its effect. To this powder, he adds a spoonful of thick, dark honey. He knows that honey helps to soothe a sore throat, and that it can help to prevent wounds from putrefying. He does not know of its powerful antibacterial properties, but he has seen its work. Finally, he adds a small, precious tear of myrrh resin, which he believes has powerful purifying properties. Its sacred scent anathema to the forces of decay. As he mixes these ingredients into a thick, dark paste, he chants. His voice is a low, rhythmic monotone. The words are not for the patient, not yet. They are for the ingredients themselves. He is speaking to the spirit of the willow, the spirit of the honey, the spirit of the myrrh. He is awakening their power, commanding them to perform their sacred duty. The incantation, for him, is what transforms a simple mixture of plants into a potent medicine. The physical substance is the arrow. The magic is the bow that shoots it. Imagine the streets of a medieval European city, though the practice is far more ancient. The air, already thick with the smells of life, is now choked with a new kind of smoke. Not the fragrant, sacred smoke of temple incense, but the thick, pungent, acrid smoke of purification. Men, often employed by the city authorities, would walk the streets with burning braziers. Into these braziers, they would throw anything believed to have cleansing properties. Juniper boughs, rosemary, and pine would be burned, their sharp, resinous scent thought to cut through the miasma. In wealthier homes, people would burn expensive frankincense and myrrh, not just as an offering to God, but in the desperate hope that its holy aroma would create a protective bubble around them. Physicians would walk through the plague-ridden streets holding pomanders to their noses, small, ornate metal balls filled with powerful aromatic substances like ambergris, musk, and cloves. A personal, portable cloud of protective scent. In its most extreme form, this involved burning sulfur. The yellow, rocky substance, when set alight, produced a choking, eye-watering smoke that smelled of brimstone. People would seal themselves in a room and burn sulfur until they could barely breathe, believing they were scouring not only the air in the room, but the very air in their lungs, killing the seeds of pestilence before they could take root. These acts of fumigation were a sensory assault, a community's attempt to fight an invisible enemy with a visible, powerful-smelling weapon. The smoke was a shield, a cleansing fire. It was likely completely ineffective against the true culprits, the bacteria carried by fleas, but it was a tangible, proactive measure. It was something to do. It gave a sense of agency in a situation of utter helplessness. And when the remedies seemed to fail, when the purifying smoke seemed only to mingle with the smoke of the funeral pyres, people turned to the most personal and ancient form of protection: magic. They sought to create an amuletic shield, a magical armor to wear against the invisible arrows of the plague. In Egypt, this would be the Eye of Horus, The Wadjet, a powerful symbol of wholeness, health, and restoration. Amulets of the Wadjet, made from blue-green faience or carved from semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, would be worn by everyone. A mother would carefully tie one around her baby's neck. A soldier would wear one into battle. During a plague, its power was sought with renewed desperation. It was a piece of divine order worn against the body, a constant, silent prayer for protection. In Mesopotamia, magic often took the form of the written word. A scribe would take a small piece of clay and, using a stylus, carefully inscribe it with a cuneiform incantation. It might be a spell commanding the demon of sickness, whose name was Lamashtu, to depart. The scribe would write, "O Lamashtu, daughter of the sky god Anu, you who glide into houses, who ensnare the limbs, who afflict the flesh, I adjure you by the great god Ea, master of magic, to depart from this house, to fly away to the desert, to the place of no return." This clay tablet would then be fired in a kiln, making the words permanent. It would be hung above the door of the house, a magical license, a legal notice served upon the forces of evil, telling them they had no jurisdiction here. And then there were the practices that sit in a grim space between medicine and magic, born of a desperate logic to expel the sickness from the body. Chief among these was the practice of bleeding, rooted in the humoral theory of the Greeks, but practiced in some form across many cultures. It was based on the idea that the plague was an excess of bad blood. The physician's task was to remove it. Let us try to observe this practice, not with modern judgment, but through their eyes. The physician is not a butcher. He is a careful technician. He would examine the patient, feel the heat of their skin, and decide that the body was overwhelmed with hot, corrupt blood. With a small, sharp bronze or obsidian blade, he would make a quick, neat incision, likely in the arm. The goal was to release the perceived poison. To them, the blood that flowed out was the sickness leaving the body. They would watch its color and consistency, believing they could see the corruption draining away. They would drain a prescribed amount, believing they were restoring balance, cooling the internal fire. It was a painful, weakening, and often fatal procedure, inadvertently making the patient more vulnerable, but it was done with the intention of healing. It was a physical manifestation of the desire to get the sickness out. These were the tools they had: herbs whose true properties were only dimly understood, smoke, which gave the illusion of purification, words of power, which offered a shield for the soul, and desperate, invasive procedures, which aimed to physically remove the illness. To us, it is a tapestry of folklore, flawed science, and superstition. To them, it was the entire arsenal of human knowledge and power, marshaled against an existential threat. It was medicine, magic, and faith, fused into one desperate, unified front against the encroaching darkness. The struggle against the plague was a war fought on many fronts. Within the body, it was fought with herbs and incantations. Within the home, it was fought with sealed doors and desperate prayers. But as the pestilence raged, it became agonizingly clear that these internal battles were not enough. Like a fire in a dry forest, the sickness kept leaping from one community to the next, carried along the very pathways that gave the ancient world its lifeblood. The caravans that stitched the great empires together with threads of silk and spice, and the ships that wove the shores of the sea into a single tapestry of commerce. These arteries of prosperity had become conduits of death. The leaders of the ancient world, confronted with this reality, made a decision of profound and terrible consequence. If the sickness was flowing in from the outside world, then the outside world must be shut out. It was a strategy born of desperation, a grand and brutal form of quarantine. It was the decision to close the gates, to bar the frontiers, and to turn the city, the province, or even the entire kingdom into a fortress against the encroaching tide of disease. Let us travel now to the arid heartlands of the Near East, to a trade route that winds like a serpent through endless seas of sand and rock. Imagine a caravan, a slow-moving river of life in the vast silent desert. 200 camels, laden with fragrant cedarwood from the mountains of Lebanon, fine dyed wool from Damascus, and heavy sacks of salt from the Dead Sea. The air shimmers with heat, and the only sounds are the soft rhythmic padding of the camels' feet on the sand, the creak of leather harnesses, and the low guttural calls of the cameleers. The life of the caravan is governed by an ancient rhythm, a timetable dictated by the location of hidden wells and shaded oases. For months, this has been the world of the caravan master, a wealthy merchant from Aleppo. The desert is his workplace, his home, His destination is a rich and powerful city-state, a jewel of the desert, where he will sell his goods and make the profit that will sustain his family for another year. He is tired but optimistic. He is only a few days' journey from the city's gates, but news like the wind travels faster than the caravan. At the last oasis, a dusty, fly-blown settlement around a brackish well, the rumours began. A sickness, they said, was raging in the coastal cities from which he had come. A swift black sickness that left no survivors. The merchant dismissed it as the usual desert gossip. Exaggerated tales told around campfires, but a seed of unease was planted. Now, as his caravan crests the final dune, he sees the city. Its high, sun-bleached walls rise from the desert floor, a testament to wealth and power. He sees the great bronze gates that have always stood open to traders like him. But today they are closed. A plume of dark smoke rises from behind the walls. But it is not the familiar smoke of kitchens and hearths. It is too thick, too constant. In front of the gates, where there should be a bustling crowd of traders and city dwellers, there is nothing. Only a handful of figures, small as insects in the distance, standing guard on the ramparts. A feeling of cold dread washes over the merchant. A chill that has nothing to do with the desert heat. He urges his camel forward, ahead of the caravan, until he is within shouting distance of the walls. A guard, his face shadowed by a bronze helmet, raises a hand. "Go no further!" The guard's voice is thin in the vast open space. "I am a merchant from Aleppo," the caravan master shouts back, his voice cracking with dust and anxiety. "I have goods for your market. Open the gates." "The gates are sealed by order of the council," the guard replies. The plague comes from the coast. No man, no caravan, from that direction shall enter this city. "Turn back, turn back." The words are an absurdity. Turn back into the desert? With 200 camels and a fortune in cargo? There is nowhere to go. The next oasis is 3 days behind them. Its water barely enough for his men, let alone his animals. To turn back is to face ruin and a slow death in the sand. He pleads, he argues, he offers bribes. The guards on the wall are silent. They have their orders. The great bronze gates, the symbol of his destination, of profit, of civilization, remain shut. They have become an impenetrable barrier between his world and theirs, between life and a slow, lingering death. His caravan is not the only one. Over the next few days, other caravans arrive, one from the south, carrying incense from Arabia, another from the east, with silks that have traveled for a year across the breadth of Asia. They too are met with the same silent, unyielding refusal. A new, desperate community begins to form in the shadow of the city's walls. It is a city of tents, a sprawling, squalid camp of the rejected. The sun beats down relentlessly. Water, more precious than silk, is rationed from their own dwindling supplies. The camels grow weak. The men, once proud merchants and hardened cameleers, become idle, their days spent staring at the closed gates, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and despair. The air grows foul with waste and the smell of fear. They are not sick, not yet, but they are trapped in a perfect breeding ground for disease. The city, in its attempt to protect itself from the plague, has created a potential plague bomb right outside its walls, a testament to the blunt and often self-defeating nature of such policies. Now let us leave the dusty desert and travel to the teeming heart of the Roman Empire. The city of Rome itself, a metropolis of over 1 million souls, is a ravenous beast, utterly dependent on a constant flow of grain from its provinces, especially from Egypt. The grain fleet, a massive state-organized convoy of hundreds of large merchant ships, is the city's lifeline. Without it, Rome would starve within weeks. Imagine you are the captain of one of these grain ships. Your vessel is heavy in the water, its vast hold filled with Egyptian wheat, enough to feed thousands of Roman citizens. The voyage across the Mediterranean has been smooth. Your crew is healthy. You have navigated by the stars, your life's work dedicated to this vital task. You are approaching Ostia, the great port of Rome, the final destination. You can smell the land, the familiar scent of Italian pine and damp earth. You see the famous lighthouse, a beacon of safety and arrival. But as you draw closer, the scene is wrong. The harbour, usually a forest of masts and a hive of activity, is eerily quiet. A small, fast warship, a Liburnian with its twin banks of oars and its complement of marines, is moving to intercept you. This is unusual. Usually the harbour pilots would be coming out to guide you in. The warship pulls alongside, its oars raised. A centurion, his armour gleaming, stands at the rail. He does not offer a greeting. His face is grim. "Captain," he bellows across the water. "By order of the Emperor and the Senate of Rome, the port is sealed. All traffic from Egypt in the east is forbidden to dock. You are to go no further. You stand on the deck of your ship, stunned into silence. You try to protest. You tell him your crew is healthy. You tell him your hold is full of the grain that Rome desperately needs. The centurion is unmoved. Your origin is your affliction, captain, he shouts. Egypt is rife with a pestilence. We cannot take the risk. Turn your vessel around and return to the sea. Do not attempt to make landfall on any Italian shore, or you will be treated as an enemy of Rome. The warship's marines, standing ready with their bows and javelins, underscore the finality of the order. You have a choice. Turn your back on your home port and sail back into the vast, indifferent sea with a dying cargo, or be sunk. The policy is absolute. The fear of the plague has become so great that it outweighs the fear of starvation. The gatekeepers have decided that it is better to risk hunger than to risk infection. Inside the city of Rome, the consequences of this decision begin to ripple through the populace. For the first few days, there is little change. But then the bakeries begin to run short of flour. The price of a loaf of bread doubles, then triples. The government's free grain dole, the annona, which keeps the vast, restive urban poor from rioting, is reduced and then suspended. A new fear begins to stalk the streets, a fear that is more tangible than the invisible pestilence. It is the fear of an empty stomach. The mood of the city sours. People who were once terrified of the plague now begin to curse the authorities for closing the port. Riots break out near the forum. The granaries are stormed. The emperor, who sealed the gates to prove his decisive leadership, now finds himself besieged by a hungry, angry populace. He is caught in a trap of his own making, a classic dilemma for leaders throughout history. The cure, in its severity, has become a disease of its own. But human desperation is a powerful solvent that can dissolve even the most rigid of rules. Where official gates are closed, unofficial ones will always open. Let us imagine a small hidden cove a few miles down the coast from the sealed port of Ostia. The night is moonless. A single merchant ship, having evaded the naval patrols, lies at anchor in the deep darkness. Its captain has a small, immensely valuable cargo of spices, silk, and, most precious of all, medicine from the east. He cannot enter the port, but he knows the demand within the city is now astronomical. A small fishing boat, its oars wrapped in cloth to muffle their sound, slips out from the shore. It is rowed by men who know these waters, who are willing to risk death for the promise of a staggering profit. They pull alongside the merchant ship. There are no haggling, no pleasantries. Sacks of coin are exchanged for small, carefully wrapped bundles of goods. The entire transaction is conducted in fearful whispers. It is a moment of pure, dangerous commerce. These smugglers, condemned as criminals by the state, are now the only ones maintaining a trickle of supply into the besieged city. They are a testament to the fact that no wall is ever truly hermetic, that the drives of human need and greed will always find a crack to seep through. These policies of closure, the sealed city gate, the blockaded harbour, the patrolled frontier, were the ultimate weapon in the ancient world's public health arsenal. They were a declaration that the community was willing to sever its own limbs to save the body. But this act of self-amputation came at a terrible cost. It turned allies into pariahs. It transformed pathways of prosperity into vectors of fear. It created new crises of hunger, poverty, and social unrest. By closing the gates to the outside world, these civilizations bought themselves time and perhaps a measure of safety. But they also locked themselves inside with their own internal divisions, their own inequalities, and their own fears, forcing a confrontation with the uncomfortable truth of who suffered most and who was protected when the final walls were drawn. There is a rhythm to a storm, the rising wind, the darkening sky, the deluge, the thunder, and then there is the quiet that follows. It is not the quiet that came before, which was a quiet of peace and normalcy. The quiet after a storm is different. It is a quiet of assessment, of exhaustion. The air is washed clean, but the landscape is irrevocably changed. Trees are uprooted, rivers have carved new paths. The world is the same, but different. So it is with a great plague. It is a storm that rages not for hours, but for months, or even years. It has its own terrible rhythm of rising fear, of desperate measures, of unspeakable loss. And then, eventually, for the communities that survive, the storm passes, the fever breaks. The daily count of the dead begins to dwindle, until one day there are no new deaths to count. The plague, as a consuming fire, has burned itself out, having run out of fuel, and in its wake, it leaves behind a profound and echoing silence. This silence is the first experience of the aftermath. It is the sound of absence. It is the silence of the weaver's loom that no longer clatters in the alleyway. It is the silence of the children's games that are no longer played in the dusty square. It is the silence of the neighbor's morning greeting, a greeting that will never be heard again. It is a quiet so deep and pervasive that it seems to have weight, pressing down on the survivors, a constant ambient reminder of all that has been lost. Imagine yourself a survivor in our Mesopotamian village. You were one of the lucky ones. The fire entered your home but did not consume it. You walk out into the familiar lanes you have known your entire life, but they are not the same. It is the same sun in the sky, the same earth under your feet, but the village feels like a hollowed-out gourd. Every third house, every other house is empty. The doors, once carefully barred, now hang open, swinging gently in the breeze, creaking a mournful, rhythmic complaint. No one is left to close them. You walk to the communal well, the heart of the village. Before, it was a place of boisterous life, of gossip and camaraderie. Now, 2 women are there, drawing water in silence. You know them, but their faces seem older, their eyes holding a distant, haunted look. There are no pleasantries exchanged. There is only a slow, sad nod of recognition, a nod that says, "You too? You are still here?" The simple act of survival has become their new, unspoken bond. This new, empty reality was governed by a brutal and simple arithmetic. In some places, a third of the population was gone. In others, half. In the hardest-hit districts of a great city, the toll could be even higher. This was not a loss that could be easily absorbed. It was a wound cut into the very bone of society. The plague, in its blind fury, had been a great, silent eraser, wiping clean half the slate of humanity. And the world the survivors now inhabited was a world built on vacancies. Let us consider the landowner, a wealthy man in the Roman countryside. Before the plague, his greatest asset was his vast estate, his latifundium. But his true wealth lay in the hundreds of tenant farmers, the colony, who worked his land. They were the engine that turned his soil into grain, his grapes into wine, his olives into oil. Now he rides his horse across his property. The familiar landscape is subtly, horrifyingly wrong. He passes entire sections of his estate that are returning to the wild. Thistles and brambles choke fields that once shimmered with wheat. The vines in a vast vineyard are overgrown, their precious grapes rotting unpicked, food only for the birds. He rides past the small clustered huts of his tenants. Where there were once 50 families, there are now perhaps 20. The rest of the small homes stand silent and empty, their thatch roofs beginning to decay, their small garden plots overrun with weeds. His overseer, a grim-faced man who has also survived, presents him with the new reality. There are not enough hands to work the land, not enough men to plough the fields, to prune the vines, to harvest the olives. The intricate, centuries-old system of Roman agriculture, which fed an empire, was predicated on a vast and readily available pool of cheap labor. That pool has now evaporated. The landowner, a man accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question, finds himself in a new and bewildering position. He is no longer the sole master of the equation. His land is worthless without people, and the people who are left, they know their own value. Imagine you are one of those surviving tenant farmers. Before the plague, your life was one of endless toil for a bare subsistence. You were tied to your small plot of land, your rent and obligations to the landowner consuming almost everything you produced. You had no power, no leverage, no choice. But now, everything has changed. You survived, your family survived, and you are strong enough to work. One day, the landowner's overseer comes to you, but his tone is different now. It lacks the old arrogance, the easy assumption of authority. He needs you. He needs you to take on the fields of your neighbor who perished. He needs you to work longer, harder, to try and salvage the harvest. And for the first time in your life, you are in a position to say no. Or rather, you are in a position to make a counteroffer. You will work the extra land, you tell him, but for a lower rent. A much lower rent. Or perhaps you will work it, but you demand a larger share of the crop. You might even be so bold as to demand that your status be changed, that your son be freed from the obligation to work this same land after you are gone. The overseer is aghast. This is unheard of. It is an upending of the natural order of things. But what choice does he have? What choice does the landowner have? They can refuse and watch their fields turn to wilderness, or they can agree. And across the empire, in countless similar, quiet, individual negotiations, the fundamental balance of power between the landed elite and the laboring poor was beginning to shift. The plague had not intended to be a social revolution, but its aftermath was creating one. The survivors, standing amidst the ruins of the old world, were becoming the architects of a new one, where their labor, once cheap, was now a precious commodity. This reshuffling was not confined to the countryside. In the cities, the same dynamic played out. A master craftsman, a potter or a metalsmith might have lost all his apprentices and skilled journeymen. The handful of surviving artisans with those skills could now demand wages that would have been unthinkable a few years before. The economic engine of the ancient world began to sputter and rebalance in strange new ways. The price of labor soared, while the value of land, without anyone to work it, plummeted. Fortunes were lost. Inheritances, which once would have been divided among many children, were now consolidated into the hands of a single surprised heir, creating sudden, immense wealth. Families that had been powerful for centuries were wiped out in a single season, and new, previously unknown names began to rise to prominence. And what of the soul? What is the aftermath for faith, for one's belief in the order of the cosmos? The plague left behind a deep spiritual crisis. The grand rituals, the expensive sacrifices to the state gods, the solemn prayers of the high priests. For many, these had been seen to fail. The gods had been angry, but the attempts to appease them had not worked. Or worse, the gods had been indifferent, silent, absent during the greatest crisis their people had ever faced. This disillusionment could lead in several directions. Some turned away from the great formal state cults, finding them hollow and ineffective. They sought solace in smaller, more intimate mystery religions, cults that offered a personal relationship with a savior deity, a promise of a better afterlife to compensate for the brutal reality of the current one. They offered an explanation for suffering and a hope that transcended the capricious whims of the old pantheon. For others, the experience led to a hardening of faith, a more fanatical piety. The plague was not a sign of the gods' indifference, but a punishment for insufficient devotion. This could lead to a grim and joyless religiosity, a world drained of spontaneous pleasure, where every action was weighed for its potential to offend the divine. And for some, the lesson was the opposite. If life was so fragile, so fleeting, if it could be snatched away in a moment by an invisible whim of fate, then what was the point of piety? What was the point of planning for a future that might never arrive? This gave rise to a desperate hedonism, a carpe diem, seize the day, philosophy born not of joy, but of nihilism. The taverns and brothels might be fuller than the temples. People would spend their sudden inheritances on fleeting pleasures, on fine food, strong wine, and opulent displays, trying to pack a lifetime of sensation into a few short years, convinced that the storm could return at any moment. The world after the plague was a world forever changed. The economies were rebuilt on new foundations. The social structures were cracked and reset. The spiritual landscape was altered as people searched for new meaning in a world that had proven to be far more dangerous and unpredictable than they had ever imagined. The survivors were left to walk through a quieter, emptier world, a world haunted by ghosts. But it was also a world of unexpected and often unsettling new opportunities. The great storm had passed, and in the strange, subdued light of the aftermath, they had to learn how to live again. Our journey through the ages is drawing to a close. We have walked the dusty alleys of silent villages and the stone-paved streets of terrified cities. We have stood in the quiet of a healer's workshop, smelled the pungent smoke of purifying fires, and felt the profound, echoing silence of the world in the aftermath. We have witnessed the myriad ways our ancestors confronted the invisible enemy of pestilence, a challenge that stripped them down to their core beliefs, their deepest fears, and their most resilient hopes. They fought with the tools they had. They prayed to gods whose anger they perceived as the source of their suffering. They drew lines on the ground, sealing their homes and their cities, in a desperate attempt to create islands of safety in a sea of contagion. They mixed herbs and chanted spells, a fusion of empirical knowledge and magical thinking. They endured, and they recorded, leaving us their stories not as a dry accounting of death, but as a testament to their struggle, their confusion, and their unwavering will to survive. From the Hittite king pleading his case before the divine court, to the Roman centurion turning away a vital grain ship, to the simple farmer realizing his own newfound worth in a depopulated world, the story is one of humanity grappling with a force beyond its control and understanding. Their responses, seen through the lens of time, may seem primitive, even counterproductive. And yet, beneath the unfamiliar rituals and the forgotten gods, we can feel the echo of our own, more recent experiences, the fear of the unknown, the instinct to isolate, the search for remedies and for reasons, the difficult balance between public safety and personal freedom, the terrible calculus of economic survival versus the preservation of life. These are not ancient problems, they are human problems. The plagues of the past remind us of a fundamental truth, that for all our knowledge, for all our technology, we remain part of a natural world that is infinitely complex and at times profoundly dangerous. They remind us of our own fragility, but they also remind us of our resilience. They show us that societies can be broken, but they can also be remade. That in the wake of great loss, there can be profound change. That the end of one world is often the beginning of another. And now, it is time to leave that ancient world behind. Leave the whispers of fear, the smoke of the pyres, the silence of the aftermath. Let them all fade into the soft darkness of history. Feel yourself returning to the present moment, to the comfort and safety of your room, to the gentle weight of your blankets, to the steady, quiet rhythm of your own breathing. The struggles of the past are over. The world outside your window is quiet. There are no gates to seal, no remedies to desperately mix. There is only the peace of the night, a sanctuary of stillness. Allow the stories to dissolve, leaving behind only the gentle cadence of my voice. And allow that too to fade, becoming just another part of the quiet, a soft current to carry you deeper now into a place of profound rest and peaceful, restorative sleep.